Many of us, we didn't grow up in secure attachment. By the way, what is secure attachment? How is it built? There's an entire philosophy of parenting, sometimes called gentle parenting, sometimes called positive parenting, sometimes called authoritative parenting, where it is focused on building a secure attachment with your child. And the sort of fundamentals of this philosophy of parenting is, on the one hand, empathy, compassion, attunement. It means that you see your child, you validate their emotions, you let them know that they are safe to express their emotions, that emotions are not shamed, emotions are not dismissed, emotions are not punished, they are not ignored, but rather they are seen and they are held and they are validated. Now, when I say that, you might be like, but I'm going to spoil my kid if I do that. And the answer is no, because one of the second fundamental factors in this type of parenting is boundaries. So what they teach is that you have to hold boundaries, but with compassion. So the example that's given is your kid wants a cookie before dinner, and you can tell me what happens when you say no to a 2-year-old who wants a cookie before dinner. End of the world type of stuff. Now that child is going to throw a complete fit, temper tantrum. Do you know that that child is absolutely developmentally normal? That's absolutely developmentally normal. Why? Because the part of the brain that regulates and controls emotion is called the prefrontal cortex. And it is not fully developed until the age of 25 to 30 years old. And for some people, it doesn't matter fully. And I don't even just say that as a joke. I mean, no, but for real though. So jokes aside, it's actually a real thing. When someone is not raised in a healthy environment, emotionally healthy environment, their emotional age can be very, very stunted. And that's why they say, people like narcissists, for example, are somewhere around the emotional age of a 3 to 5-year-old. Seriously. So what happens, and it's not just narcissists, but it's the fact that we don't realize, but when we were not given the proper attunement, all mental health, it basically goes back to, at some point, this human being did not get proper attunement. So if we're not given the proper attunement, it stunts our emotional development. In other words, it stunts our emotional maturity. And that is why we have many people walking around in adult bodies, but internally they are 6-year-olds, emotionally. And that is why when they are triggered, they go back to being 6 years old. And they go back, and I don't say that to be an insult. I say literally they go back to being that scared 6-year-old. So you can imagine what happens in marriage, because now you get married and y'all know what happens next. You trigger each other. Marriage is basically a place to trigger each other. And that can be a good thing because, as one person said, nothing triggers you. It only reveals you. So what is it doing? It's pointing to your unhealed wounds. See, if I were to get a gunshot wound on my arm, but I cover it up, no one sees it, I ignore it, maybe I don't even realize, or I forget it's there, until someone just brushes against it. It could be the most gentle brush, and I scream. Why? That's a trigger. It's when my reaction does not fit what has happened because there is an internal wound. And this happened in childhood. So what happens now is that when you have two people and their wounds are being triggered, how do their wounds get triggered? I'll talk about that more in detail. But when their wounds get triggered, it's not a 35-year-old and a 40-year-old arguing, it's two 6-year-olds. Because when you're triggered, you go into your survival brain. If you were to look at brain scans, the prefrontal cortex, we said this is where we regulate emotion. Remember the kid who's having a temper tantrum? The 2-year-old, their prefrontal cortex isn't even developed. So they can't control their emotions. This is why they have meltdowns. This is why they have temper tantrums. But see, when you're triggered as a 45-year-old or a 55-year-old or a 35-year-old, your prefrontal cortex, it may be there, but it goes offline. It goes offline. And now you are, and this is, I'm not just saying it metaphorically, in brain scans. You are now literally in your survival brain, which is called the limbic system or the amygdala. And you're no longer thinking clearly at a very neurological level. You are only thinking of survival. In other words, when you're triggered, whoever or whatever is in front of you looks like a lion or a tiger. Can you imagine in marriage? But this is why it's so important to talk about this. Because if you don't know how to regulate your nervous system, if you don't know how to regulate your emotions, and you are constantly getting triggered into your survival brain, and you're constantly thinking threat, 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 I'm not safe, then what's happening is you have a husband and a wife, and they're both looking at each other as the tiger. You can imagine how that's going to go. You are the threat. You are the enemy. You are attacking me. And so now it's any means necessary to do what? To defend yourself, to protect yourself, to survive this threat. That you can imagine why that's not conducive to a healthy relationship, because you're going to be considering the other person the enemy. And this is why it's so important to learn how to, number one, heal those wounds so that you're not getting triggered as easily, and so that you're not going into this fight or flight survival brain, and so that you're not just trying to win or just trying to defend yourself. Going back to the kid with the cookie, because I want to talk about how this all began. We were children once, and that's when it was programmed. So going back to the cookie, see that 2-year-old who's throwing a temper tantrum because they want the cookie. There are 3 ways to respond, 3 philosophies of parenting. The first is what you and I are pretty much most accustomed to, and that's called authoritarian parenting. This is shut your mouth, or you're going to get, I'll give you something to cry about. Stop misbehaving. You're going to have a timeout. I'm going to spank you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the child is now punished for doing literally all the child knows how to do, because the child cannot regulate their emotions. Their brain is not developed to do so. And of course, they're disappointed that they can't have a cookie. That's like their whole world at that age. So you're telling them something that is so devastating, and they don't yet have a developed prefrontal cortex to control their emotion and their reaction. And then you're punishing them for that, when they're actually acting completely behaviorally normal. That's absolutely normal for that age. The second option or response is the opposite, which is called permissive parenting. Permissive parenting, once the child freaks out, the parent will be like, okay, fine, you can have the cookie. Now, the problem with permissive parenting is that you're reinforcing the behavior, number one, and you're also not sticking to protecting the child, because it's not healthy for them to have a cookie for dinner. That's permissive. It doesn't have boundaries. We said the authoritarian is punishing the child for having emotion, and the permissive is giving in when they shouldn't, because they're supposed to be keeping the child safe and healthy. Now, what is the middle, which is all about creating a secure attachment? It is to validate the emotion of the child. I can see that you're very upset. You're very angry because I didn't give you a cookie. I totally understand that. But I'm sorry, you still can't have the cookie. So what it is it's validation, attunement with boundaries. And that's the philosophy of building a secure attachment. One of the most toxic things that we see in authoritarian parenting, which is what many of us are accustomed to. We grew up with that type of parenting, which is very focused on control. Authoritarian parenting is it's very focused on, I'm the parent, I'm in control, I'm in charge, and you obey. Now, that is extremely unhealthy for several reasons. One of the reasons is that you should never make your goal raising a child who is blindly obedient to you. And I'll tell you why. Because a child who is blindly obedient to you will be very easy to take advantage of. Why? Well, because if you've taught them that you must blindly obey adults, then when an adult comes and wants to take advantage of them or harm them or oppress them, they will stay quiet. And that's part of the training that they got because they were told you blindly obey authority. Very dangerous. We only blindly obey Allah. We don't blindly obey anyone else, even the parent. So this is also not healthy. Yes, there needs to be boundaries taught of respect, but that goes both ways. And yes, your job is to hold boundaries to keep your child safe. You can't just give in and do whatever they want. But if the focus is control over connection, you're going to suffer and that child's going to suffer because that's not a secure attachment. And it becomes a lot easier for that child to be taken advantage of and a lot harder to speak up. So what happens now when the insecure attachment is now taken into adult relationships? I'm going to talk about two types of insecure attachments, which pretty much make up many of our relationships in specific marriage. The first type of insecure attachment style is called anxious attachment, and the preoccupied or anxious attached is a person who grew up in a home where there was some sort of abandonment. Either there was emotional abandonment or physical abandonment. This is a person who learned early in life that the people you love will leave, or they may leave, or they may abandon you. And so this person carries this deep anxiety around relationships, which is rooted in what is called an abandonment wound. How does that play out in their future relationships? These are people who are very preoccupied with if they feel like someone is mad at them, they become very anxious. They will replay conversations in their mind over and over. Like, what did I say wrong? Are they mad at me? It's a person who has a lot of anxiety around relationships. And this gets triggered anytime they feel distance, emotional distance. What is it rooted in? It's rooted in an abandonment wound from childhood. Now, there's another type of insecure attachment called dismissive avoidant. This is what you might consider the opposite, but it is still rooted in not having your emotional needs met in childhood. But this one goes to the other side, and this is usually the men. So the women tend to go more anxious, and the men tend to go more dismissive avoidant. Now, what is a dismissive avoidant? A dismissive avoidant is someone who grew up in a home where emotions were completely neglected. Someone who grew up in a home where emotions were either ignored, denied, famed, or even punished. So, for example, we'll use example of men. The little boy is crying. So he's showing a normal human emotion of sadness, and he is told, stop crying, stop acting like a baby, man up, don't be a girl, etc. He is shamed, he is punished, and he learns that it's not okay to feel. And of course, this can happen to girls as well. Usually this happens with girls in terms of anger, where girls are told if they're angry, that anger is not something you're allowed to feel or you will be rejected. Now, I want to remind you that every emotion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created was created for a purpose. Allah doesn't make mistakes. And so every emotion is actually a messenger. It's telling us something. It's serving a purpose for us, even sadness, even anger. Your anger is, if you think about your home, see the walls around your home, see the front door, see the electric fence. That's only in South Africa, by the way. See these protections you put around your house? The walls, the door, the fence. Those are called boundaries. Those are your boundaries. If you do not have boundaries, what happens? Anyone can come in and do whatever they please. And this is why it's so dangerous not to have boundaries. It's like you knock down the walls in your house, you remove the electric fence, and you don't have a front door. Are you going to be safe? Absolutely. This is South Africa. Anywhere. You wouldn't never leave your front door open. And yet many of us, we do this because we don't have boundaries. But see, the alarm that's around the house that goes and it starts to go off when someone is trespassing or encroaching, is overstepping the boundaries. See that alarm? That's healthy anger. But many of us were taught to take out the batteries. You're not allowed to feel anger. Good girls don't get angry. And so what that does is it's like a person who's taken out the batteries from the security system. So anytime someone is overstepping or being unjust or crossing boundaries, you don't get angry anymore because you've learned to suppress it. And guess what happens when you do that? So a recent study out of Stanford found that there was a correlation between autoimmune disease and the suppression of healthy anger. And now I'm going to mention oldest daughters. You all know who you are. It's a real thing. I'll tell you this. I was doing a retreat, one of my retreats on healing the emptiness. And I kid you not, I think every single person there was an oldest daughter. Why does that happen? Well, the oldest daughters tend to play a certain role in the family. And that is that they are the ones responsible to save the world. They are the ones responsible to carry everyone else, to be responsible to fix everyone else, even responsible for everyone else's emotions. And this is why oldest daughters tend to be people pleasers. Wow. What is a people pleaser? A people pleaser is someone who learned early in childhood that you better not upset or disappoint the people around you. Because if you disappoint, upset, say no, don't be pleasant, don't suppress, you won't be safe, or you will be rejected, or you won't be loved, or you won't be the good girl. Y'all know Elsa and Anna? Frozen? Yes or no? You're afraid Majlis will hear you. And Elsa, the oldest daughter syndrome, conceal, don't feel, never let it show, be the perfect girl you always have to be. You guys getting it? And then there's Anna. It's so funny because it's so accurate. You know the second daughter? You know what I'm talking about? Now I'm talking to you. You all need to thank your older sister because it's because of her that you can be like Anna. You're the rebel, you're the free one, because you know what? You can live your best life because she took the role of carrying the world. And I know that's the case in my family. My older sister did that role, but to her own detriment in a lot of ways. So I get to be the Anna. And then my younger sister, she just gets to do whatever she wants. No, I'm just kidding. At some point, we have to realize that it's on us to carry the weight of the world. And it was never our job to be responsible for the others of others. There is a difference between being compassionate and caring and feeling like it's your job to please everyone. People pleasing, and you may not have realized this, people pleasing is a trauma response. It comes from an environment where you had to live in what is sort of like a minefield. You know, a minefield is where you don't know where you step, where it might explode. It's like that. It's an environment where it's not safe to just be honest and authentic. It's an environment where you might have been around an explosive parent or someone who never learned to regulate their own emotions. And so you learned to ignore yours or to suppress yours. Now, I want to just, inshallah, get to how this dynamic works when the avoidant marries the anxious. So the lovely thing is avoidants tend to marry anxious. So here's how it plays out. On the one hand, you have the person who sees emotional distance as a threat. They become very anxious. They will pursue, they will chase, they will over-explain, over-apologize, try to people please, everything they can to bring closeness again because they have an abandonment wound. And the fun part is that they're married to someone who's actually triggered by closeness, right? You get it? If you want to understand your life, this is actually the explanation. I cannot tell you how much I was like, so see, all this like terminology is like accessible now. And I'm like, where the heck was this when I was struggling? I would have loved to know what was going on. But this is what's going on. See, the dismissive avoidant grew up in a home where emotions were not okay. Emotions were shunned. They were neglected. They were ignored. They were shamed. They were punished. And so he learned to disconnect from his own emotions. He learned, or she, but usually he, learned that the only way to survive is to suppress emotion, to completely disconnect from them. So this individual is overwhelmed by emotion, and that is why they either attack or shut down. So here's how the dynamic works, right? Person A, we'll say that's the wife. We'll say that she has an anxious attachment style. She comes to the husband with something that has upset her, that he has done. So she comes to him and said, you know, when and when you said this, when you did this, it upset me. What does he hear if he has a dismissive avoidant attachment style? He hears, you're saying I'm a failure. You're saying I'm the worst husband ever put on God's earth. You're saying that I am worthless. So what's happening is his wound is being triggered. The wound of the avoidant is called a defectiveness wound. It's a person who deep down thinks that they are broken, that they are defective, that they are not capable of giving you what you want. And so every time you complain, that's being triggered. And it triggers actually their shame. And so when shame is triggered, you actually go to your survival brain and you go back to what you know to survive. So you're saying that I am a failure. I am the worst husband ever to walk the earth. And the more emotional you are, the more he'll hear that. But now what does he do as a response? Well, you're telling me I'm a failure. Nobody wants to feel that they're a failure. So what will he do? He will defend himself. How does he defend himself? Well, by telling you that you're wrong. No, I didn't do that. No, that didn't happen. No, that's not accurate. No, that's invalid. No, you're too emotional. No, you're too sensitive. No, you're insecure. No, you're on your period, right? Am I telling lies? But see what that is? That's him defending the attack on him, which he feels so deeply because it's touching a wound he has from childhood that told him that, number one, emotions are scary, emotions are not safe, and that he is defective. And so he will do anything to deflect from feeling that shame. So the first line of defense is typically defensiveness. The defensiveness is the one that involves, if she says, you hurt me when this happened, and he says, no, I didn't happen. You're too sensitive. You're imagining it. It's basically gaslighting. It's to dismiss. It's to kind of invalidate it. Now, what does that do to the anxious person who basically felt unseen and invalidated their whole life? Well, makes them more upset because now you're not validating what I'm saying. So now I have to defend it. So now I have to get more and more upset to prove that I have a right to be upset. And the more upset she gets, the more defensive he gets. And the more he's like, you're just crazy at this point. So lovely, so fun. And then after defensiveness isn't working, sometimes they'll move to shutdown, complete. So this can be leaving the room, leaving the house, picking up their phone. This is called stonewalling. Completely shut off, done. I don't hear, you're not talking, you don't exist. Go to sleep. That's another fun one. See, all this dynamic is dysfunctional, but where is it coming from? It's coming from the childhood insecure attachments. We didn't learn in childhood how to regulate our emotions because our parents didn't teach us. Our parents didn't teach us because they were never taught. And they were never taught because their parents were never taught. And this is how generational trauma gets passed on. So what's the solution? I guess that's the question. The solution is, and I want to give you the good news. The good news is all of this can be rectified. The good news is that all of this can be healed. All of this can be rewired. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the brain have neural plasticity, meaning that it can actually be changed. It can be retrained. But the answer is we have to recognize it first and then go deep into the core wounds. How do we do that? Awareness is step one. And then step two is realizing that there's no shame in getting therapy, going and getting help, whether that's individual therapy as well as marital therapy, family therapy. There's no shame in getting help any more than there is shame in going to a doctor if you break your bone or if you do have a gunshot wound. No one says to that person, where is your tawakkul? Where's your iman? Walk it off. You're being dramatic. Pray it off. The Prophet ﷺ told us, so when this companion wasn't tying his camel, the Prophet ﷺ asked him why. He said, because I have tawakkul. And the Prophet ﷺ said, tie it and also put your trust in Allah. So tying our camel means getting therapy when there is trauma. Tying our camel means getting marital counseling when there is marital problems. That is tying our camel, and that is part of our worship. So there's no shame in that, and in fact, it is rewardable. The other thing I want to mention is never buy these labels. So everything that I talked about today, I gave you a lot of terminology, but this terminology is meant to be a guide. It's meant to be a tool. It is not meant to be your identity. I am anxiously attached, and that just becomes what I am. No. Or I am a dismissive avoidance, so that's just who I am. No. These are tools. Even depression. There's a difference between saying I've been feeling depressed versus I am a depressed person. I hear this all the time, like anxiety. I'm with anxiety versus I am an anxious person. Don't this as your identity. These are struggles, yes, but they are not who you are. These are things that we can overcome with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and with the help of the asbab, the tools. Take the tools. Educate yourselves on parenting, because I want to say something. If you noticed, every single thing I talked about was rooted in childhood. So how about we change the way we raise our kids? How about prevention is better than cure? Because so much of the work that we do in these spaces is healing. It's, damage control. But what if we can do it better from the beginning? And this is why I started focusing on parenting, because that's actually where it starts. And it is so important. There's almost no role that you play that can be more important, because you are setting up another human being for the rest of their life. Even that voice inside your head came from your parents. Even that voice. The voice that beats you up. The voice that's so harsh. That inner voice. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? You have blank faces. You don't know what I'm talking about. You all have really positive self-talk, right? You know exactly what I mean. See that inner voice, that negative self-talk that is the harshest critic when you make a mistake and you take out the whip? Why, it's like, why, you're so stupid. You're such an idiot. You're a failure. You're not worthy. You're all of that. And you're fat. And then we're so mean. God. Anyway, that voice, where did it come from? You inherited it. You inherited the voice. Even the inner voice, even the self-talk is a voice you inherited. You were not born talking to yourself like that. You learned it. You heard it. You internalized it. Now it's your voice. This is why we have to be so careful how we speak to our children, even when they make a mistake, and especially when they make a mistake, because that is the voice that they will speak to themselves for the rest of their lives, long after you're gone, when you're in the ground, actually. And you want to ask yourself, do you want that voice to be harsh and abusive, or do you want that voice to be kind and compassionate? If you want to talk about one of the most important tools of resilience, it's self-compassion. It's to be kind to yourself. And I know what you're thinking, but then I need to motivate myself. Do you motivate someone by whipping them? What kind of motivation is that? By punching them in the face? When someone's down, how do you motivate them to get back up? By kicking them? The answer is no. That's how you keep them down. And so this idea that you're going to motivate yourself through this negative self-talk is actually completely wrong. In fact, I can talk neuroscience. When a person is in shame, what's shame? I want you to understand, shame is what says, I am broken intrinsically. I am not good enough intrinsically. I am flawed. I am bad intrinsically. Shame says that when you make a mistake, it's because you are intrinsically bad, or you are intrinsically unworthy or broken. Shame is also inherited. So many of us, we were raised on shame. Not just shame, man. Not that kind of shame. That's a compassionate statement. Completely different. Many of us were raised with shame. What is shame? Shame is, I'll give you the GPS example because it explains shame. Imagine that you put your address into the GPS, and as soon as you make a wrong turn, your GPS says, you worthless driver. You have literally no sense of direction. You have made 55,000 wrong turns in the last year, and I'm keeping track. And then I'm going to keep reminding you of every wrong turn you made. Why? To remind you that you're a worthless driver. To make sure you know that you have no sense of direction. That's shame. Many of us were parented this way. You make a wrong turn. Tell me, has anyone not made a wrong turn? Is there anyone who's never made a wrong turn? Was it? I don't know if it was. No, it wasn't here. It was in Europe. I asked this question. Someone raised their hand. And it was like this girl. And I said, how old are you? And she said, I'm 9. So she proved my point. Alhamdulillah. And then this last tour, I was like, I finished the seminar, and this mom and daughter came up, and she's like, I'm the one who raised my hand that time. I said, just keep not making wrong turns. But if you can drive, we all make wrong turns. So what does the GPS do? No judgment, recalculating, just make a legal U-turn. Like, no judgment, no, you can make 1,000 wrong turns, and the GPS will not shame you. It will not judge you. It will literally only redirect you. That is the job of parents. Oh, it sounds so wild and so foreign. We literally have one job as parents, and that is to protect our children in this life and the next. To direct our children. We are the GPS. But if we continue to use shame, it only makes them want to stop trying to drive and just give up. Shame is inherited from generation to generation until one generation says, I'm going to stop. I'm going to break the cycle. I'm going to heal myself. I'm not going to pass it on to my kids. You and I have that opportunity because we are aware. Your job is to redirect, not to shame. Hold the boundary, but with compassion. Do not teach your child to hate themselves. That is the worst thing you can do. And if that is how we have parented our kids, be compassionate to yourself. Know that that's what was modeled from what you saw, what you knew, but you can change it. And you need to. You need to change it. And my advice to you is, we don't have a lot of time to get into it deeply, but my advice is to do your research. Look into the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. He's a parenting and trauma expert, and many others on the topic of positive or gentle parenting. And I'll just wrap up with this for this segment. Yeah. To the argument of tough love, I've given a lot of psychology evidence, but I want to give you evidence from the Quran that tough love is not a thing. Tough love is not how Allah or his messenger are with us, or how the Prophet ﷺ was with his companions. One example is, the Bedouin who was urinating in the masjid? You guys know the story? Do you know how wild this is? He was urinating in the masjid. And the Prophet was literally restraining the companions from going for him. And he said, let him finish. Can you imagine? If that was your kid, they'd be dead, right? Can you imagine what the imam would do, what the auntie next to you would do, what you would do? And I'm not talking, this was a grown man. I'm talking a 2-year-old does that. They're dead, He says, let him finish. And then he goes to him, and with compassion and no shame, he didn't go up to him and say, you disgusting human being, you despicable person, you dirty man. He did not do any of those things. I just want you to imagine, as a mental exercise, how would we react to that? If that was our kid, what words would we use? Just as a mental exercise. Exactly. And that's a child. Even if the child were potty training and can't even control their bladder yet, what words would we use? Understand? He's a grown man. And the Prophet ﷺ did not shame him, but he redirected him. He didn't leave him in the wrong way. The GPS doesn't say, oh, you're okay. It's okay. Just keep going south and you're supposed to go north. No, redirecting, recalculating, but without judgment or shame. He explains to him that this is not right without shame. Allah actually says in the Quran that had the Prophet ﷺ been harsh the way we like to be, and hard-hearted, tough love, that had he been that way, the people would have been repelled from him. This is an ayah in the Quran. Had you been harsh and hard-hearted, the people would have been repelled from you. Pharaoh, you know who Pharaoh is? This is the man who kills babies. This is the man who amputates limbs, the man who crucifies those who disagree with him. This is the man who stood up and said, Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I am your Lord Most High. So you know who Pharaoh is. When Musa alayhi salam is told to approach Pharaoh, the most evil man to walk the earth, who has competition today, he says to him, speak to him with gentleness. Do you guys hear that? Qawlan layyin, which means gentle words, lest he be guided, lest he realize and come back. Now, I want you to think about that for a moment. Pharaoh, Allah, not me, not, a teacher, Allah, not a psychologist. Allah is saying, speak to Pharaoh with gentle words. Now, how do we speak to our own children? None of our children are Pharaoh, no matter how much you might think so. How do we speak to our own children? Tough love, quote unquote, is inherited trauma. It's generational trauma. It's not you making your child straight, you making your child thick-skinned. That's all trauma. We have to go back to healing ourselves and breaking this cycle for the next generation. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت استغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا.